Thomas Hobbes Leviathan, The Foundations of Commonwealth and Sovereignty. Hello, I'm Dr. Gregory Sadler, a philosophy professor and the founder and president of an educational consulting firm known as Reason.io, where we actively apply philosophical principles in practical ways. With over 2 decades of experience in studying and teaching philosophy, I've noticed that many individuals encounter challenges when trying to read classic philosophical works. Often, this difficulty arises from the way ideas are expressed or the structure of the texts themselves. However, the underlying concepts are frequently not as complex as they may seem, and that's where I step in to assist both students and lifelong learners. I have been creating longer lecture videos and sharing them on YouTube, and many viewers have expressed that they find these resources beneficial. What you are currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each dedicated to exploring a single core concept from a significant philosophical text. My hope is that you will find this series helpful as well. In Chapter 17 of Thomas Hobbes Leviathan, we enter the second part of the work, which is titled Of the Causes, Generation, and Definition of a Commonwealth. Up to this point, Hobbes has been discussing the human condition and contemplating how we can transition from a state we find undesirable to one that we aspire to achieve. This chapter serves as a pivotal moment where he introduces the concept of the sovereign as a solution to these challenges. Hobbes begins by asserting that human beings have a natural inclination towards liberty and a desire for dominance over others. This assertion presents a challenge, as we all yearn for our own freedom and the rights that come with it in a state of nature, where we can pursue our desires without restriction. However, this pursuit can lead to conflicts with others, as our desires may clash. Not only do we face competition for the same resources, but there is also a psychological aspect at play, where we have a tendency to want to assert our superiority over one another. Thus, the situation is not merely about economic rivalry, it involves deeper psychological dynamics that heighten the potential for conflict. Hobbes elaborates by stating that the ultimate purpose or design of individuals, who inherently cherish liberty and control over others, is to introduce a form of self-restraint. This restraint is evident in the way people coexist within commonwealths. Here, we encounter 2 key elements. What does this restraint entail? It involves recognizing the laws of nature that Hobbes outlined in earlier chapters, which define what this restraint looks like. He further explains that this self-restraint is motivated by the foresight of personal preservation and the pursuit of a more fulfilling life. In other words, it is about escaping the dire conditions of war that naturally arise from human passions when there is no visible authority to maintain order. In this opening paragraph, Hobbes packs a wealth of ideas, referencing the necessity of a common power to prevent chaos. To ensure that the laws of nature are upheld and to prevent individuals from pursuing their desires unchecked, it is necessary to impose certain regulations. This enforcement is often rooted in the fear of punishment, which compels individuals to adhere to their agreements and observe these natural laws. Without such measures, we risk losing the very things we seek, the ability to preserve ourselves and enjoy a life where we can rely on the security of our possessions. Moreover, if we dedicate time to learning and applying knowledge, we can enhance our lives significantly. This situation reflects the essence of the human experience, and the question arises, how can we transcend these limitations? One potential solution is to foster connections among ourselves, which we will explore shortly. Now, let's delve into the concept of natural laws. These laws, in their essence, are often at odds with our innate passions, which can lead us toward bias, pride, and revenge. This presents a significant challenge. While we can recognize these natural laws through reason and understand that they bind us internally, motivating people to adhere to them becomes difficult when they conflict with our natural inclinations. Therefore, an enforcement mechanism is essential. Furthermore, it is important to note that agreements made without the backing of authority are merely words and lack the power to protect individuals. This creates another dilemma. When we enter into agreements that extend beyond natural laws, we must acknowledge that without an authoritative figure, someone with the power to enforce rules and impose penalties, people are unlikely to honor their commitments. Even those who initially intend to uphold their agreements may find themselves swayed by their emotions and rationalizations, leading them to make exceptions or excuses for their behavior. If we allow this to happen, societal order will inevitably deteriorate. So, how do we navigate this predicament? This question lies at the heart of the discussion. Additionally, it is worth mentioning that there are instances where small family units have lived by codes of honor rather than strictly adhering to natural laws. In such cases, the so-called law of nature suggests that in the absence of a governing authority, individuals must look out for themselves and their families. This scenario illustrates another aspect of the state of nature. Hobbes refers to a multitude, a term he uses intentionally to describe a group of people gathered together. He poses the question of whether it is possible for some form of order to emerge spontaneously through customs and institutions, allowing these individuals to coexist as a society without any political authority. He argues that security does not stem from the mere assembly of a small group, rather, it is the larger collective that provides strength and stability. Imagine if we had a large group of people to protect us from external threats trying to steal our resources. The key factor in feeling secure isn't the exact number of people, but rather how they compare to the enemy. A group is sufficient for defense if the enemy's advantage isn't so overwhelming that it guarantees defeat. However, Hobbes points out a significant issue: even with a large group, if each person acts based on their personal desires and judgments, the group offers no real protection against a common foe. This is because internal disagreements and conflicts weaken the group's ability to defend itself effectively, making their collective strength negligible. Hobbes further argues that if it were naturally easy for people to come together and form a functioning society without a central authority, we would already see many such societies. He notes that agreement, cooperation, and peace do not arise spontaneously. He draws an interesting comparison between humans and social insects like bees and ants, which Aristotle considered political creatures because they live together harmoniously. Hobbes explains that humans differ from these insects in several crucial ways. 1. Humans compete for honor and dignity, which is irrelevant to bees and ants. 2. In insect societies, the common good is indistinguishable from individual interests, unlike in human societies. 3. Bees and ants, lacking reason, do not question the management of their collective affairs, whereas humans, with their rationality, constantly evaluate and critique leadership and decision-making in any collective endeavor, from politics to everyday projects. Hobbes emphasizes that this human tendency to critique and seek control is a product of our rational nature and is evident in every aspect of our social interactions. He also notes that while social insects have some communication abilities, they lack their complex verbal interactions that lead to the endless debates and disagreements among humans. In essence, Hobbes argues that the very qualities that make humans distinct, our rationality, our desire for status, and our ability to critique, also make it challenging for us to form and maintain stable, secure societies without a strong central authority to manage conflicts and enforce order. There's a fascinating aspect of language, a real artistry with words, that allows certain individuals to portray something virtuous as wicked and vice versa. Essentially, we can employ language to hide the truth, to deceive, and to control others. Interestingly, he points out that irrational creatures, unlike humans, are unable to differentiate between an intentional wrong and mere harm. Consequently, they don't take offense as easily with other members of their species. He also makes a distinction between the natural agreement found in these creatures and the artificial agreement among humans, which is established through a covenant, a concept we'll delve into shortly. So, what are our options, then? Hobbes suggests that we could establish a sovereign, which is a different approach than simply having a large group of people. He argues that the only way to create a common power that allows us to achieve our desires is to entrust all our power and strength to a single individual or to a single assembly of individuals. This entity would then consolidate all our individual wills, through a process of majority decision-making, into a single, unified will. In essence, we would appoint a person or a group to represent us collectively, and each of us would acknowledge and accept responsibility for everything this representative does or causes to be done in matters concerning our shared peace and safety. Here's another crucial point: we must also submit our individual wills to their will and our personal judgments to their judgment. We're essentially creating an authority that stands above us. Although they originate from among us, they occupy a position of privilege. We accept their word as the final say, allowing their will to become our own. If our personal wills clash with theirs, we must yield and find a way to align ourselves with their decisions. We're transforming this diverse collection of conflicting wills into a single, unified will, so to speak. Hobbes believes this is a truly unique and defining characteristic of society. This is where the social contract theory comes into play. We all enter into an agreement with one another, and he emphasizes that this is more than just mere agreement or harmony. It's a genuine unification of everyone into a single entity, brought about by a covenant between each person and every other person. Imagine each individual saying to every other individual something like this: I authorize this person or this assembly to govern me, and I relinquish my right to govern myself, on the condition that you do the same and authorize all their actions in the same way. This is the essence of the social contract. We collectively agree to surrender certain rights, including the right to make judgments on certain matters and to oppose the authority of the sovereign. I agree to do this because I know you're doing the same. Think about it like a monopoly on force. We grant the sovereign the exclusive right to use deadly force, and we agree not to use deadly force against each other, except perhaps in extremely rare situations like a home invasion. I only agree to this because you're also agreeing to it. That's how this mutual agreement functions. As Hobbes describes it, this process is what he refers to as the generation, or the creation of something new and significant. When discussing the concept of a great authority, or more respectfully, a mortal entity to whom we owe our peace and protection under the divine, it's important to clarify that this authority can take various forms. It might be an individual, a structured system of power, or even an assembly. Regardless, there will always be a person or group ultimately in charge. This is what we refer to as the sovereign. Before moving forward, it's essential to revisit the role of nature in this context. Hobbes introduces an intriguing point: there are two distinct ways sovereignty can be established. This distinction is particularly useful in addressing a common objection to his theory. Many might argue, we never agreed to this kind of arrangement. How can you claim that a king, president, or any leader has authority over us? I didn't choose them, they simply exist in that position. Hobbes responds by outlining two methods of attaining sovereign power. The first is through what he calls natural force, which differs from the instinctual behavior seen in creatures like bees or ants. Natural force occurs when one person imposes their will on another through coercion. A prime example is when a conqueror defeats their enemies in war and offers them a choice: submit to my rule or face death. In such cases, it's in the conquered party's interest to comply, even if reluctantly. Another example, though perhaps more controversial, is when a parent compels their children, and their children's children, to submit to their authority, leveraging the threat of punishment or even destruction if they refuse. While this may seem extreme, it illustrates how power can be established within familial structures. The second method is through voluntary agreement. Hobbes describes this as individuals collectively deciding to submit to a leader or assembly, trusting them to protect their interests against external threats. This arrangement is known as a political commonwealth or commonwealth by institution, and it's the primary focus of Hobbes's theory. However, he also acknowledges the existence of commonwealth by acquisition, where power is seized rather than granted. This raises an important question: did most people ever explicitly agree to a social contract? For those born into long-standing societies, the answer is likely no. Yet, Hobbes argues that such agreements are implicit, as if every individual tacitly consents to the authority that maintains order within their society. In functioning civil societies, he believes, authority operates on this basis: individuals surrender certain rights to a governing body in exchange for security and stability. In order to achieve the goals and desires we have, it is essential to acknowledge and respect the authority of the governing body or sovereign. This means understanding that there are established rules and structures in place that guide how we can attain what we seek. For instance, when we want to make changes in our community or pursue certain privileges, we must first recognize the role of those in power and work within the framework they provide. This approach not only helps us navigate the system more effectively but also fosters a sense of cooperation and mutual respect between individuals and their leaders.